He built a church from nothing, turned pain into purpose, and became a voice that carried millions through their darkest storms. But now, after years at the top of gospel music and ministry, Bishop Marvin Sapp has done something no one saw coming. He's walked away. Why would a man who had everything suddenly leave it all behind? What truth lies behind this unexpected move? Stay tuned, because the real story of Bishop Marvin Sapp's decision will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about faith, fame, and calling. But behind Bishop Marvin Sapp's sudden decision to relocate lies a story far more complex than anyone imagined. Was a call from God, the weight of personal pain, or a quiet battle he could no longer fight where he was? Today, we're uncovering the untold truth behind Bishop Marvin Sapp's mysterious move and what truly drove him to start over. For years, Marvin Sapp has been more than a gospel artist. He's been a symbol of strength, faith, and endurance. From his soul-stirring anthem Never Would Have Made It to sermons that have changed lives, he built not just a career, but a spiritual legacy. So when news broke that he was walking away from the city he'd called home for decades, it wasn't just surprising, it was shocking. This wasn't a small step, it was a life-altering decision that sent ripples through the gospel music world and the faith community alike. People began to wonder, what really happened? Was it divine direction, or were there deeper struggles beneath the surface? In this video, we're peeling back the layers, from the personal losses that shaped his journey to the behind-the-scenes challenges of ministry that few ever see. What made Bishop Sapp finally say, "It's time to move on"? Stay tuned, because the story behind his decision will leave you seeing his faith and his strength in a whole new light. You won't believe how deeply the pieces of this story connect, because what seemed like a simple relocation may actually uncover years of quiet battles, heartbreak, and divine renewal. Uncover years of quiet battles, heartbreak, and divine renewal. By the end of this video, you'll see Bishop Marvin Sapp in a way you never have before. So stay with me, because as we go deeper, the truth behind his move gets both powerful and personal. To truly understand Bishop Marvin Sapp's decision, we have to step back to the man behind the pulpit, behind the music, and behind the fame. Marvin Sapp isn't just a gospel artist. He's a survivor, a father, a preacher, and a voice that has carried millions through their darkest nights. His story isn't one of overnight success or smooth roads. It's a journey carved by faith, loss, and the unshakable will to rise again. Born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Sapp's connection to music began before he could even spell his name. At just 4 years old, he was already singing in the church choir, his voice filled with innocence yet marked with purpose. Those early days shaped the foundation of a man who would one day redefine gospel music. But what made Marvin Sapp truly stand out wasn't just his talent, it was his authenticity. He had a way of blending timeless gospel soul with modern emotion, creating music that reached beyond church walls and into hearts worldwide. Long before solo fame, he was already making waves with the iconic gospel group Commissioned, helping to shape an entire generation's sound. And yet, his greatest legacy isn't found in awards or albums. It's found in his endurance. Through heartbreak, loss, Through heartbreak, loss, and moments of unimaginable pain, Marvin Sapp became the living example of faith under fire. His story proves that sometimes the greatest songs are born not from success, but from survival. The world witnessed a man who remained steadfast in his faith in the face of unfathomable grief. When his wife, Dr. Melinda Sapp, died in 2010 following a fight with colon cancer, he was left to raise their 3 kids alone, juggling parenting, leadership, and ministry with sadness. The doctrine, leadership, and ministry with sadness. The doctrine he had always preached, trusting God even when life doesn't make sense, was reflected in his strength throughout that time, according to many. Additionally, he continued to serve the world through his music. Songs like My Testimony and The Best in Me became anthems of hope and survival for Sapp as well as his audience. Pieces of his own struggle and redemption were present in every performance and poem. Bishop Sapp's ministry as a pastor expanded concurrently. He was a spiritual leader in addition to being an artist. In Grand Rapids, he established Lighthouse Full Life Center Church, where he served as pastor for many years, leading a flourishing congregation with a message of healing and fortitude. He wasn't just singing about faith for many, every day he lived it. Nevertheless, something was changing behind the scenes despite all the success, the crowded church services, and the honors on his shelf. Sapp appeared agitated, as friends and close colleagues saw. He frequently talked about reaching out, exploring new areas, and hearing God's voice calling him to something bigger. Grand Rapids has served as his home, his haven, the setting for his most treasured memories and site of his most agonizing suffering for many years. However, it soon became apparent that Bishop Sapp was getting ready for a new phase of his life. There was a stirring, and many people were left stunned when it was officially announced that Bishop Marvin Sapp was leaving Michigan. Supporters questioned why a man who was so ingrained in his neighborhood and so adored by his hometown would abruptly leave it all. Was it the expansion of the ministry? Was it a case of personal healing, or was the story more complex than it first appeared? People were unaware that this change was anything but abrupt. It had been developing for years, behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, a process of silent preparation, prayer, and planning had been taking place. Even so, there would be conflicting feelings, debate, and conjecture surrounding the choice. This is when the exciting part begins, because Bishop Sapp's decision to relocate will usher in a completely new era that nobody anticipated. Bishop Marvin Sapp. New era that nobody anticipated. Bishop Marvin Sapp had been the lifeblood of Grand Rapids gospel and faith community for many years. Lighthouse Full Life Center, his church was more than a congregation. A family was involved. He preached, and people traveled great distances to hear him. In addition to being a world-renowned gospel performer, the community also recognized him as one of their own, a man who made Grand Rapids famous for reasons more than just his singing. Therefore, no one wanted to believe rumors that he would be departing the city he helped develop spiritually. Sapp's departure from city he helped develop spiritually. Sapp's departure from Grand Rapids initially seemed like just another rumor. He had spent decades in that town, after all, within those municipal limits. In that town, after all, within those municipal limits, he had experienced his greatest personal tragedy, as well as growing up and raising his family. It seemed unthinkable that he would go away and start over somewhere else. But something was simmering beneath the surface. Something more profound than anyone had thought. According to those close to him, Bishop Sapp had been considering the choice for a while. Ministry was no longer what it once was. His restlessness was influenced by the demands of leading a developing congregation, the emotional attachment to his late wife's memory, and the weight of leadership. There were advantages and disadvantages to Grand Rapids. Although it was home, it also served as a continual reminder of the life he had lost. According to his friends, he frequently talked about feeling a heavenly tug and that God was changing his task. It might have appeared to outsiders like a career pivot or a midlife shift. Sapp, however, saw it as a spiritual shift, and he held that, despite the discomfort, there are instances when you must let go and follow God's next course, even after you've created something amazing. It wasn't an easy transition, though. It took a great deal of fortitude to leave the congregation that had supported him through everything. Imagine spending years in those church walls speaking, baptizing generations, advising marriages, and starting a family, then deciding it was time to leave. Location wasn't the only factor, it has to do with obeying. Emotions were running high when Bishop Sapp declared his intention to relocate. While some churchgoers were dubious, others were sympathetic, and some were devastated. On social media, rumors proliferate quickly. Rumor had it that the choice had something to do with money, celebrity, or a desire for a new beginning in a bigger market. Some even questioned a new beginning in a bigger market. Some even questioned whether he had left because of internal church conflicts. However, Sapp stayed composed and concentrated, never giving in to rumors. In his sermons and interviews, he was quite clear that this decision was not about abandoning anything, it was about taking a step into the future. God's work never remains in one location. He once stated something that struck a deep chord with both his detractors and his fans. It was his way of suggesting that your location may need to change as your purpose changes, and that's precisely what took place. Sapp disclosed that he was moving to Fort Worth, Texas, a city renowned for its thriving gospel scene and active religious community. His fan base was shocked to hear the news. Why Texas? Why now? Did he have a deeper calling, or was he just pursuing new opportunities? Many people were unaware that geography wasn't the only factor in this. It had to do with development. Fort Worth was an opportunity to start over and create something from the ground up. It represented resurrection, a concept that had characterized his entire work and life. With the same attitude of worship and faith that he had fostered in Michigan, he opened a second Lighthouse Full Life Center branch in Fort Worth. However, this new action brought with it new difficulties. He was entering a whole new ministry culture, a new audience, and a foreign setting. It was a daring gamble for someone who had accomplished so much already. For Bishop Sapp, however, trust has always meant taking a bold step into the unknown. However, some people contend, bold step into the unknown. However, some people continue to whisper behind the scenes. Some speculated that weariness may have been the driving force behind the shift. Perhaps he simply needed a new beginning to breathe after decades of bearing so many burdens. Others conjectured that he was driven into altar by the demands of celebrity, the weight of expectations, and perhaps even personal hardships. But one thing was evident throughout. Bishop Marvin Sapp was adamant about doing what he thought was God's will, regardless of whether others agreed with him. Sapp made the brave decision in a world where so many people seek solace. He made the decision that purpose rather than loss would define his future chapter. However, this change was not at all easy. And where things start to become really illuminating is when the true tale of how everything happened in Texas is revealed. Because his move did more than simply change his address, as we will see in a moment. It changed his outlook, his ministry, and even his legacy. However, it also sparked debate over what obedience and success actually meant in the contemporary church. It felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new one when Bishop Marvin Sapp made his move to Fort Worth, Texas, official. The change was more than just a geographic one for many supporters. It had significant metaphorical meaning. Fort Worth stood for possibility, rebirth, and the prospect of a fresh start. Bishop Sapp had long been a pillar of the Christian community in Michigan. He was now entering a fresh area and prepared to sow seeds once more, this time in a city renowned for its musical culture and spiritual vitality. However, even for someone with as prestigious a reputation as Marvin Sapp's, beginning again is never simple. He was more than simply a gospel star when he first got to Texas. As a new pastor, he was prepared to start from scratch. There was genuine excitement. Although there was pressure, fans in the Dallas-Fort Worth area were excited to see what he would do next. Expectations were in place. Could he make the same kind of difference as he did in Grand Rapids? Would he receive the same devotion and love from the community? Everyone, even Bishop Sapp himself, was eager to see the answers to those queries. His early years of ministry in Texas were characterized by perseverance, preparation, and prayer. In Fort Worth, he started the process of starting a new Lighthouse Full Life Center church. He wanted more than just a structure. He desired emotion. His goal was to build a church that would serve as a center for outreach, mentoring, and worship, while fusing traditional religious principles with a contemporary style that appealed to the younger population. And Bishop Sapp led authentically, as he always did. He didn't claim to know everything, and he didn't downplay the difficulties of beginning anew. He freely discussed the difficulties of beginning anew. He freely discussed the challenges of acclimating to a new setting, coping with the distance from former friends and family, and striking a balance between his pastoral responsibilities and music career in a number of interviews. Nevertheless, he consistently returned to one fundamental reality. Any short-term discomfort was worth it to obey God's call. This new attitude was mirrored in his sermons at Fort Worth. His tone changed as the audience noticed. He focused more of his sermons on trusting God's timing, transformation, and transition. He frequently reminded his followers that in order to achieve what is meant to be, sometimes must leave behind what is comfortable, and that elevation necessitates separation. That message resonated not only with his churchgoers but also with the innumerable admirers who followed his journey from a distance. To be clear though, relocating to Texas wasn't solely a ministry decision. It also complemented his development as a gospel promoter, businessman, and public figure. Texas provided an promoter, businessman, and public figure. Texas provided access to important platforms that could assist spread his message, as well as increased visibility and a robust entertainment sector. Although his career had always been based on his faith, moving to Fort Worth allowed him to combine his music and ministry in ways that appealed to both churchgoers and general listeners. Bishop Sapp also used the occasion to broaden his sphere of influence outside of the pulpit. He made investments in mentoring young leaders, collaborated with other ministries, and started new community initiatives. He frequently expressed his zeal for preparing the next generation for ministry and life in interviews. He didn't want to do the same thing he had done in Grand Rapids and Fort Worth. The goal was to become the best version of himself. Nevertheless, there were challenges associated with this new stage. Building trust from the ground up is necessary when launching a ministry in a new city. His leadership was not instantly accepted by everyone. Some questioned why he did it. Others likened his ministry in Texas to that of his former Michigan congregation. There were logistical issues as well, locating the ideal space, allocating personnel, handling money, and striking a balance while continuing his music career. Bishop Sapp moved forth with peaceful assurance in spite of the obstacles. He used to say that God equips you for new things when he calls you to them. And as new church started to develop slowly, that faith became clear. Attendance began to rise. His influence among the Texas faith community started to grow as more individuals started interacting online. What's really fascinating, though, is how this transformation started to alter him as a person. His loved ones said that Texas brought him serenity, a form of recovery he hadn't completely felt since the death of his wife. Bishop Sapp was able to reevaluate, reconstruct, and rediscover himself not just as a leader but as a man away from the recollections and reminders of the past. He reportedly started to enjoy life, travel more, and smile more than he had in years. And fans also took notice of that. His public persona changed. He appeared more at ease, more liberated, and more rooted in his evolving self. He was more than just the gospel icon Bishop Marvin Sapp. He was Marvin Sapp, the guy who followed the next phase of his heavenly destiny as a father, mentor, and servant. Naturally, though, not everyone had a skeptic's perspective on this change. Some detractors persisted in speculating that the decision was motivated by industry politics or even financial considerations. Every time a prominent individual in the gospel world takes a risky stance, conflict usually ensues. There were rumors that Sapp might have intended to grow his company or pursue more lucrative ventures in the entertainment sector. Others speculated that the change might have been related to ministry issues that were not publicly disclosed. But Bishop Sapp never listened to the commotion. He continued to move steadily, continue working, continue spreading the gospel, and let the outcomes do the talking. And eventually they did. His church in Fort Worth started to flourish. His influence grew even more powerful than before, and his music never ceased to inspire. The maneuver turned out to be anything but a retreat. It was a heavenly realignment, an opportunity for him to live and serve differently. This next stage of his trip would soon show the world much more about the man behind the pulpit and the microphone. Let's go on to the section that really gets folks talking. Many have questioned whether there was more to Bishop Marvin Sapp's story than a spiritual calling, even though he openly characterized his relocation from Michigan to Texas as a heavenly assignment. Was listening to God's voice the true purpose of this action? Or was it also a strategic choice to change his ministry and increase his power? We must examine both the practical and the spiritual aspects in order to comprehend it. On one hand, Marvin Sapp is a man who has always placed a high value on religion. Prayer has influenced every significant choice he has made, from his ministry to his music. He experienced one of the most difficult times of his life with the death of his wife, Dr. Melinda Sapp, in 2010. He claimed for years that experiencing grief helped him become even more attentive to God's guidance. He frequently expressed his desire to live a life driven by his purpose rather than comfort. Those who were close to him realized that something was going to change when he started talking about experiencing a change in his spirit. Before deciding to relocate, a change in his spirit. Before deciding to relocate, Sapp is said to have prayed for months. He explained that he thought God was guiding him into a new season of impact and even sought advice from friends in ministry and spiritual advisors. This wasn't abandonment to him. Alignment was the cause. However, some analysts counter that although the action may have been motivated by faith, it also made great strategic sense. Texas, particularly the Dallas-Fort Worth region, has emerged as a significant center for media, mystery, and gospel music. It is home to several of the most significant Christian networks, churches, and conferences. Texas was the ideal location for Bishop Sapp to broaden his influence as a musician and a clergyman. Fort Worth is more than just a religiously oriented city. A flourishing network of gospel musicians, producers, and influencers call it home as well. By moving there, Sapp was able to get closer to important gospel gatherings, industry contacts, and partnerships that may help him expand his platform. It was a wise decision from a business perspective. It gave him the opportunity to combine media and ministry in ways that may have a significant impact on millions of people. Bishop Sapp may have even been looking for a more balanced lifestyle. According to several people with knowledge of the matter, he'd seen as much as one place could provide after decades in Grand Rapids. In addition to raising his family and building his church, he had completed a large portion of his goals. However, as a nationally recognized leader, it was not viable to remain in one location indefinitely. He had a bigger canvas to paint his next chapter on, thanks to Fort Worth. However, that does not imply that there were not difficulties. It was not just physically taxing to leave the foundation of a Michigan church and begin anew in Texas. It was emotionally exhausting. Sapp acknowledged that loneliness and uncertainty accompany transformation. The unknown can put you to the test, even if you have a strong faith. During that time, he frequently discussed in his sermons how true faith is demonstrated when you leave behind what is comfortable and how obedience can occasionally cost you comfort. Although he didn't elaborate, many of his followers took those comments to be introspective and suggested that his decision was motivated by both personal recovery and ministry growth. For him, personal recovery and ministry growth. For him, Texas was a clean slate. It allowed him to exhale from the burden of being Marvin Sapp, the mythology, the memory of his late wife, and his years of hardship. He might reclaim his own self in Fort Worth, away from the expectations of others. The man sang would never have succeeded, but he could be more. Instead of being bound by the hurt of the past, he may be a leader going ahead, but there are pragmatic considerations underlying any spiritual choice. It takes financial, human, and emotional resources to move a whole ministry across states. Concerns were raised regarding the impact of the changeover on his first church in Grand Rapids. Would Michigan's Lighthouse Full Life Center function without him? Would the leadership continue to be stable? According to some reports, Sapp took great pains to guarantee that the Michigan office would continue to function under capable local leadership. He wanted his leaving to feel like a continuation rather than an abandonment. However, any significant shift in leadership causes repercussions. His previous congregation's members had conflicting feelings. Many were in agreement, recognizing that their bishop was acting in accordance with God's will. Others, however, acknowledged feeling off balance or even offended. Sapp was more than simply a pastor to them. He belonged to the family. A hole was left by the idea of losing that spiritual bond. Additionally, as is sometimes the case with ministry changes, rumors and conjecture dominated the quiet. On social media, some detractors claimed that the decision was driven by money, particularly as SAP's national prominence increased. Discussions concerning whether he was moving away from solely pastoral work and toward a goal of brand building were triggered by his frequent appearances on TV, music charts, and frequent appearances on TV, music charts, and ministry venues. Those close to him swiftly dispelled the claims, pointing out that Sapp had always maintained his integrity while juggling his preaching, business, and musical endeavors. The relocation seemed to revitalize him. If anything, Texas provided him with fresh chances to connect with audiences that had never witnessed his leadership in action. His church flourished, his preaching schedule grew, and his music remained popular with all ages. Both theories, the strategic and the spiritual, may be correct in many respects. Astute planning and God's calling are not mutually exclusive. They frequently collaborate. Bishop Sapp has always made a conscious effort to blend professionalism and purpose. His decision to relocate to Texas was a prudent investment in his long-term objective, as well as a leap of faith. However, new opportunities often bring new challenges, as is the case with any significant change. Additionally, Bishop Sapp's new season faced increased criticism, even though he found development and rejuvenation in Texas. High exposure frequently carries larger expectations in the gospel and church world, and not everyone is prepared to celebrate your accomplishment. As his ministry took off, rumors started to circulate once more. This time, it was about what was actually happening in Texas behind the scenes. Did everything go as smoothly as it seemed?